Good evening and welcome. We are in our Northwest Community College 1010 course. This is meeting number 9, March 31, 2014. So we're going to now have a little conversation about some master schedule planning. You may want to have day planners out. You may want to have sheets of paper out. You may want to have the packet of this evening out. And we'll then have some outlining work here that we're going to do right away. Okay. The meeting number 9 packet of this evening. Let's start there. And again, you're wanting to make sure that you put your packet in the correct order. Obviously, make sure your cover sheet has all of these things. If any of this stuff needs to be added, then do it now as we're going through it. The Chapter 7 annotations, make sure on your cover sheet you've provided me with titles of all those models, the authors' names of all those models, and the page number ranges of all those models. So that's significant. You also want to make sure that you've got your Chapter 21, 22 annotations bull-pointed work. That's an important part of this project, and so you want to make sure that you'll have that included. The grammar handbook section R, I believe, was the grammar work. The next thing was the tutorials, and that one divides into 2 parts, and I want to see this on the cover sheet divided into 2 parts. The first is the Northwest Community College tutorials from Hinckley Library, and there were 3 of those. I qualified them as A, B, and C. A, what is a citation? B, the Go Wild Net tutorials, and finally C, the MLA Citing Sources Guide. And again, just as long as you took notes over some of that stuff so that you could at least show me that you looked at it. On the Learn Strong side, this is your grammar lecture. And I'd like you to take out those notes real quickly. And also you should have your printout for the Oxford grammar exercises, basic, intermediate, and advanced. All right? Show me really quickly by holding up your grammar lecture notes from the online tutorial. Did you show me that you did it? Okay, good to go, good to go. Ms. Kellogg, were you able to get this done? Or?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about the notes. Did you take notes over the tutorial?
You guys not then?
Okay, did you watch the tutorial over grammar on Learn Strong?
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
All right, girl. And Reading House, good to go, right? You were able to get it watched?
Yeah, I got it watched. I just have to find my...
Okay, good, good, good. Here's why. From this point on, then, I hold you responsible for that information. So, in other words, before you hand in anything else to me, you want to be looking for things like comma splices, like run-on sentences, like agreement issues in regards to pronouns. Everyone forgot their homework. Sounds right to us, but grammatically incorrect. Everyone forgot what? Everyone forgot his or her. That's correct. That's correct. So we've got to pay attention to these kinds of standard English syntactical constructions. Okay, that's important. Along with the Oxford stuff, just make sure you've got some evidence that you did that work at all 3 levels of basic, intermediate, and advanced. And again, you want to make sure that's all logged right there on your cover sheet. All right, so make sure that it's there. The Chapter 7 paper with your 5 references and the MLA style book. It's possible that after my lecture this evening, you will not hand that paper in to me until tomorrow, making some adjustments. It's possible. We're going to go over this MLA stuff one more time. We'll talk about it. You want to make sure, obviously, that that paper needs to look as closely to the model on 772 to 779, okay, as we were looking and talking about it last week. All right? And then finally, the last thing listed, I believe, is the Teaching Company Lecture number 6 that we will do here in class in a little bit. Correct? Any questions about the meeting number 9 cover sheet? We all kind of know what we're doing there. Good. All right, let's talk now the meeting number 10, which takes us into the month of April, of course, and what that means is that we are now really starting to see the light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, and hopefully it's not the choo-choo train coming at us, right? The first thing you want to write down is the Chapter 8 annotations. All right, the Chapter 8 annotations. The second thing is the Grammar Handbook, Section GL, section GL. The third is the, again, tutorials work. And we'll go ahead and call this tutorials for Northwest Community College and tutorials for LearnStrong, just like we did before. On the Northwest Community College tutorials, A, I want you to look at the information on online resources for writers. And B, I want you to look at the information on plagiarism. Okay? Plagiarism. Major no-no. We'll talk about plagiarism and why it's such a big dog deal tonight as we get into this conversation about citation of source work. On the LearnStrong side, there's two pieces of information that I want you to pay attention to and I want you to watch. The first one comes on the left-hand side, Overcast tutorials. Okay, there's a folder. Overcast is our librarian here at the high school media consultant, and she has provided us with a series of tutorials that specifically have to do with using the Go Wild databases. Her comments and observations are crucial in the construction of your papers, so I just want you to watch that stuff, take notes. Okay. So that's down the left-hand side. The other tutorial that I want you to watch really for a few seconds is the Paperator tutorial. And this information is right on the home page itself. Scroll down to the bottom, you'll see it. Paperator, it's all one word. Okay? And you three high school people, I want you to just scan through that information, make sure that you feel comfortable. I mean, obviously you've been using that software, so I don't have to worry so much about you three. You don't have to worry about notes, but I just want you to make sure that you know that you're reminded of what's going on there. Okay.
Overcast.
Overcast stuff, I think, could be of service to you to review again. Same gig, though. Okay, just kind of follow it. I know that you've been exposed to it already in class. Okay. We'll come back to this Paperator thing, but it's telemetric scoring that looks at your paper and finds errors for you. Grammatical, vocabulary. It even scores your paper at a collegiate level, at a college level. You'll tell it to score it at the college level, and it will do so for you, giving you an actual letter grade. Okay? You're going to print out the entire Paperator information from page 1 to however many pages it is, and you will include that with your paper when you actually hand in papers. So anytime you're writing papers from here on out, you want to submit those papers to Paperator, you want to make adjustments, suggestions to how to improve the paper, etc. Okay, back to your cover sheet. Number 4. This is your Chapter 8 paper on page 425. Let's go ahead and look there real quickly. Page 425. The paper for this chapter is called Justifying an Evaluation. I'm reading with you on 425. You're going to write an essay evaluating a particular subject. Obviously, you will have done this after you've already looked at this chapter, so you got a clue what kind of paper this looks like. You're going to examine your subject closely and make a judgment about it. This is, again, an arguable thesis, a bit of writing, right? Give reasons for your judgments, reasons based on widely recognized standards for evaluating a subject like yours. You're going to support your reasons with examples and other details from your subject. That's code language for 5 pieces of external validation. You have 5 pieces of citation. So you're going to have 5 more references, just like before. We're into the heart of our 1010 class now, and every paper that you write is going to have this requirement of the MLA style book with citations of at least 5. All right? We'll get into that conversation here in a bit in more detail. Okay? Also make a note to yourself that not only will you follow the MLA style book, but this will be the first time that you'll use the Paperator software, and you will print that Paperator information as you get ready to hand in Chapter 8 paper. The other thing that you'll have on the cover sheet will be the Teaching Company Lecture number 7. Lecture number 7. So that's the first packet. The second packet that you're going to hand is the final formal paper number 2 packet. Again, you're going to have a cover sheet. This is separate from your other packet. Again, this will be a decision on your part of whether you're going to hand in an edited, revised version of Chapter 4 or Chapter 5. So you get to choose. It's either going to be Chapter 4 or it's going to be Chapter 5. Again, on your cover sheet, make sure that whichever one of those 2 chapters you choose, tell me what chapter you've chosen, tell me what the assigned topic was from Axelrod Cooper, so that we have some sense of what this paper is going to be about on your cover sheet. Okay? Now, for the final formal paper number 2, you can run PaperRater, and I would recommend that you do so, but you will not give it to me. You will not submit it to me. All right? So in other words, when you hand in this paper, there aren't any marks that you put on it. You hand it in to me, and then I read it. So, strong suggestion. Make sure that if you're trying to get something higher than a C in this class, you really now got to get serious about finding grammatical errors and stylistic errors, syntactical errors in your paper. PaperRater can help you, so write the paper early. Don't be writing this paper on the day that it's due, so that way you just hit the print key and hand this thing into me. You know, your paper could obviously be scored lower if problems are found. Okay? The MLA style book will be scored very closely for this paper. All right? Very closely for this paper. One of the suggestions that I can give to you when you're looking at the Overcast tutorials is to look at her tutorial on noodle tools. Okay, for you high school guys, I know you already know about this, but on noodle tools, a way to create your works cited page. All right, it's very useful software, but make sure that when you go into the command menu at the very beginning on Noodle Tools, that you let Noodle Tools know that you are working with the MLA style book, not the APA style book. All right. Okay, that concludes now our master schedule conversations. Any questions about any of that? We all kind of know what we're doing there. All right. If it's me now, I would go to a sheet of paper for some notes. I would qualify those notes as the MLA style book, citation method, and the like. I've got a little packet here that I'm going to hand out to you with some information that can help you as we begin now to have some conversation about what it means when we are doing research writing, which is just basically academic writing. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to do a quick series of comments here, and Logan, you can just kind of bugger off when you need to. It's not a worry. This will be posted in the folder for 1010. So, all right. All right, let's go to work now. We now hit, really, the heart of our class and our time together. Our objectives now are to talk closely about what it means when we are working with a style book. Okay? And issues of citation. Okay? Of course, the verb of citation is to cite. So, for example, when we say cite appropriately, we've got to come up with exactly what that word is. By the way, make sure you understand, that is not the word S-I-T-E or S-I-G-H-T. Those are different words. Okay? To cite something means that you tell where you got your information from. Alright? Now let's talk through the process of research writing, which is academic writing. The process. The process begins with step A and the assignment of a writing prompt or a question. So for example, when we were just looking in our book on page 425, that's a writing prompt, okay? They just called it writing assignment, okay? Now instructors will have, at the university and the academy, different language that will basically mean the question about which you must write. Okay? Sometimes it'll be called a prompt. Sometimes it'll be called an assignment. Sometimes it'll be called a term paper. Sometimes it'll be called a blue book. There are different terms for it, but all of them share in common that there is some kind of an understanding that you are being asked to do something compositionally that involves research. Okay? That involves some kind of research. So the first step when you get this prompt is to obviously begin the process of outlining. Now, outlining involves several steps. One is to just, you got to understand what it is you're being asked to write on. I mean, I've seen several statistics, and I'm inclined to agree, that way up over 80% of student writers within the academic community struggle to just understand what they're being asked to do. Think back to the Axelrod Cooper papers that you've already written. For example, in one paper you were told you cannot take a side one way or the other on this arguable thesis. You have to present both sides. And some of us struggle a little bit to actually do that, as opposed to you must choose a side, one side or the other of an arguable thesis, right? So it's so imperative that early on you actually understand, what am I being asked to write on? Okay? What is the topic about which I'm being asked to write on? And then you have to start thinking in your outlining about how much time, energy is it going to take for you to write this paper. Sometimes profs will say, write a research paper as a midterm paper in a history class, and then they'll give you a parameter of must be over 15 pages, cannot be over 50 pages. And then they will say, you choose the topic. Now it's at that point you have to make a decision that involves, what kind of topic am I going to write about? Where am I going to go to find my research? How much research will I need? Always as part of your outlining, you want to make sure that you ask two questions. One, what style book will I be expected to use? If the instructor says, I don't care, use any style book you want, I recommend that you go with the one that you know the best. Most likely it will be the MLA style book just because you've worked with it in this class. Okay? If the instructor says, I want you to follow the Chicago style book, or I want you to follow the APA style book, then it's hypercritical in the outlining phase that you know what that means. So you go back, you go online, you do a little bit of research, make sure that we know exactly what that style book is like. Most history profs or sociology profs are not going to walk you through what it means to cite the APA style book. They're just going to tell you that's what we want. The other question is number of citations or references required. This is an important question. So for example, notice in our class I have said to you how many? As a minimum 5. Now you can write with more than that, but at least 5 different times in the body of your paper you're going to have to cite from 5 different sources. And that means you're going to have to give some time, energy to it. Where are you going to go to find that information? Again, the tutorials that I've recommended to you can help you so that you can go immediately to the places like databases where you want to be doing your research. You do not want to be doing your research on the open Google. You do not, right? It's just it's too complicated an issue to be able to do that. All right, you get lots and lots of stuff for sale and all kinds of stuff like that.
If we use the same source twice in our paper for the whole endnote thing or whatever, how do we make that number go again?
So if you're using the same source, and this happens sometimes, where you're going to cite from the same source, you're just going to do it in 2 different parts of your essay. That is fine, but on the works cited page, it'll only appear one time, right? Because that source is there. When we get to that conversation, I'll try and make that real plain, okay? So we know what we're doing. All right? So you do all the outlining. Of course, I'm going to recommend that you engage in some of that jam writing that we talked about before, some of that free writing, trying to get your ideas put together. Good research on papers of a similar topic, very useful. I recommend that you look at those papers, and here's why, so you'll know not to use them. Let me give you a classic example. You are in the 1020 Lit course. The instructor says you have to write a paper on the play Hamlet. You go to the internet. You go to the sites that will give you these papers on Hamlet. Let's say that, for example, the topic is to discuss Hamlet and his relationship with Ophelia. And you go and you find all these papers on Hamlet and Ophelia. Of course, some students will just take those papers and try and hand them in as their own. What do we call that? That's plagiarism. That's the P word. That's called dumb real dumb. But what a lot of students will do is they'll take the ideas from those papers and then they'll kind of change them and make them their own, right? But the only problem is that in a class of 20 students, how many of those 20 students will probably be doing this? A good number of them, we can guess. Do you hear me? And so if you're handing in your paper, borrowing from papers and online papers, you run the potential problem of A, being accused of plagiarism, and B, writing papers that sound and look a lot like your colleagues. That is not what you want if you're looking for an A paper. So this is all part of the early outlining phase. Now, once you've got an outline, then we're ready to go to the second part of the paper. Now, let's talk about that. There's two parts to any paper as you're writing. One is what we will call in-text citation. Okay? In-text. All right? The second, and we'll call this the C, is what we will refer to now as end-text citation. And this is your works cited page. All right? Now your paper is made up of two parts. Okay? You can call it your stuff and their stuff. Alright? Hope that makes sense. Your stuff, the stuff that you write that is your own ideas and your own words. Easy. Anything other than that would be somebody else's stuff. Okay? This is the validation that we're going to call citation. In other words, it comes from some other place. Anytime, understand what I'm saying, anytime that you report anything in your paper that is not your specific language and ideas, you must say where it came from. If you don't do that, you are guilty of plagiarism. Okay? So it's hypercritical that you understand that any time you are providing this stuff that is not your ideas, you have to say where it came from. Okay? Now the way you will do that citation is in two places. First, you're going to do it in the actual paper itself. This is in the body of the paper. Okay? So in the actual paper. Alright? Now, in the in-text citation for the MLA style book, we have all kinds of rules. I'm not going to go through the minutiae of these rules. That's why you got a textbook. That's why you can hit the MLA style book online site. You can get all kinds of stuff on YouTube that can walk you through this in detail if you need it. And I recommend you look at it, okay? But what we're going to be talking about is the concept of when you are citing your material, for sure, you always have to make sure that you have an author's last name as a part of in-text citation. Okay? Always have to make sure that you have an author's last name. Okay, so I found some information on the internet, but I had no author associated with it. Don't use it. Don't use it. Find some other place where you can always have an author's last name. That's why we call it their stuff. This ain't your ideas. This is somebody else's ideas. Now, there's two ways that you can quote. Okay? You can quote what we call a secondary quote, or you can quote what we call a primary quote. Alright? What do these mean? Well, real simple. A secondary quote is any time that you paraphrase or summarize somebody else's stuff. Even when you put it in your own words. This shocks some students when they hear this. Even when you put it in your own words, you still have to say where it came from. Okay? You can't take anybody else's stuff and call it your own. Dude, I switched out the words. Way wrong answer. When you are using any information that comes from another place other than yourself, you have to appropriately cite that information. Now, when you provide it in the form of a paraphrase or a summary, you do not use quotation marks. Okay? However, at the end of your treatment, or at some point in the process of the treatment, you have to say where it came from. All right? A primary quote is, of course, a direct quote, and this one involves the use of quotation marks. All right? The use of quotation marks. This is a word-for-word quote. Okay? So let's say, for example, crazy example, that the instructor has given you the topic. Here we go. Are you ready? The moon is made of cheese. Okay? Arguable thesis? Well, maybe. Okay, so here we go. The moon is made of cheese. And so you go out and you find that there, believe it or not, are people who will argue the moon is made of cheese. I mean, you've never been there, so how would you know? And it kind of looks like cheese on a good night. See how that works? Maybe it's a hungry dorm student or something, a college student. So you go out and you find this person named, last name Smith. All right? And Smith has written several papers on the moon is made of cheese. And you're going to quote this information in your paper. Okay? There's two ways to do that. One is you can simply say, Smith suggests that the moon is made of any number of potential substances, cheese being one of them. This is all your own words, but you still have to cite Smith as being the origination of this idea. If you're going to cite Smith exactly word for word, Smith says, quote, the moon is made of cheese, end quote. That's what we call direct quote. Okay? Either way, you have to tell where the information came from. Okay? Now, what are the rules? Simple, really. The MLA stylebook is actually a very user-friendly stylebook. It says this: you have to give enough information to the reader, normally the prof, so that the reader or the prof can go find that quote or that information wherever it is. I'll say it again because it's so important to understand what I'm saying. You have to provide enough information so that the prof or the reader can find the quote or the information that you are referring to or citing. Okay? So you got to provide enough information. In the MLA stylebook, most of the time, that's the author's last name, unless you're messing with books, and then you got to deal with the page number and some of those kinds of things. You never, hear what I'm saying, you never, in the body of the paper, provide the URL or the HTTP for a website. No way, no how. We're not going to allow for those kinds of distractions to happen in the body of the paper. Okay? Now, there's two ways to involve Smith's name in the writing of our paper. Let's make sure we understand both of them. One is to use Smith as part of the narrative. Okay? So, in other words, we're going to say, Smith suggests the moon, blah, 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 is made of cheese. Do you got me? And then we've got our little quotation mark there or whatever, okay? Do you got me? In other words, we're using this as part of the narrative. There's the author's name right there. Do you got me? Okay? That information will be enough for us on a works cited page to go and to find the entry for Smith that will tell us where Smith said that. Right? And we have rules about how we will do that. That we'll get to in a second. There's a second way to do this, and that is to include it not as part of the narrative, but simply as at the end of the quote, and you'll just use a parenthetic, right? The moon is made of cheese, direct quote, and then afterwards you could put Smith's name, okay? And that information correlates to the information on the works cited page. Okay? A cardinal rule of the MLA stylebook, and of course the APA stylebook as well, is that you do not want to have lots and lots of garbage in the body of your paper that becomes a distraction. Make sense? That's why you don't ever put the long URLs or the HTTP addresses and all that kind of stuff. Number two, sometimes in your academic research, you are allowed to cite organizations, if they are credible ones. Think, for example, of NASA, right? So you're doing research on NASA's website. And you can sometimes gain information that will not have directly an author's name associated with it, but the NASA name is associated with your information, and you can kind of get around that. I always like to suggest to students, if you find information on NASA's website, but it's not attributed to an actual name, in this case Smith, then go on to the databases and find that information through doing searches of any number of kinds, right? And find somebody whose name's associated with it. Almost always you'll be able to find somebody whose name's associated with the idea. That will allow you to not have to worry about a prof saying, I don't want to accept this data because it's not attributable to an academic, to an actual name. Okay? One of the reasons why profs now have become so stickler about this is uncovering some of those plots on university campuses. One of the notorious ones was a few years ago, where a guy was on a college campus, but he never went to classes, and he was making tens of thousands of dollars every semester by sitting in his dorm room, and people would come in and say, I'm working on a research paper on this topic, photosynthesis. I need this quote for it to say this. And the guy would create websites right away that would post the information that needed to be cited. And that way students could immediately have whatever kinds of information they needed. Which is why you could probably find some idiot on the net that will say the moon is made of cheese. Because on the net you can find pretty much anything you want. Which is why you need to be researching incredible databases for information. This is one of the reasons why we will never quote or cite from Wikipedia. It's not that the information on Wikipedia is all wrong. Much of it is, of course, very accurate. But the problem with Wikipedia is that anyone can go onto that website and can edit or can change, correct? Can edit or can change information. So instead of using Wikipedia, you're going to use something like the Encyclopedia Britannica website, right, for the database there. Why? Because to have any kind of information presented on the Britannica website, you're going to have information that goes through a series of editors and the like. Okay, it's more credible. All right, and your ability to become more critical about potential database websites and information online is a big part of learning how to write these papers correctly. Okay. There are rules in the MLA style book about everything from quoting in an interview when you're interviewing somebody to any number of other kinds of citation method. All of that is in the MLA style book, both in your Axelrod Cooper information as well as online. If you haven't looked at it, you should look online to the MLA style book's website itself, okay? Now, after you've written in the body of the paper, we're now ready to go to the Works Cited page. Let's go ahead and find that Works Cited page real quickly at the end of page 778, 779 in Axelrod Cooper. So go ahead and go there real quickly. 778, 779. By the way, just because I'm here, take a look at 758 real quickly in Axelrod Cooper, just so you can see it. These are your electronic sources. Well, I know you already read this. I know you took copious and assiduous notes over this. And I'm assuming that you know what we're talking about. We talk about electronic sources, especially, of course, online information, right? There's the information. There's an entry for a Works Cited page the way it's supposed to look, right there on 758, okay? Now, if you will go with me to 778, 779, you are now looking at a model Works Cited page, okay? Now, it's very, very important that you understand a distinction I'm about to draw. There is a difference between a bibliography and a Works Cited page. Okay, so let's make sure we understand this difference. There is a difference between a bibliography and a Works Cited page. A bibliography is a list of any resource that you looked at, that you consulted or you looked at. Okay? So for example, back to our middle school years when we had to write the history of football paper and we could go and find 13 sources and we would list them all, but our paper actually was only written from one source. That's what we mean often when we use the term bibliography. A Works Cited page is different in this regards. A Works Cited page only lists the information that's actually cited in the body of the paper. This is a crucial distinction and one you have to understand. If you are listing, look at page 778, 779, any of those citations, any of those references listed on this page means somewhere in the paper that precedes it, somewhere that work was cited, actually in the body of the paper. Do you got me? Okay? So that's crucial to understand. There's just a few logistics I want to point out real quickly. Notice that it's called a works cited page, and the word works cited will appear at the top of a new page. Notice, you continue numbering your pages with the new page of a works cited page starting. So for example, notice it's Dinah number page 7 and Dinah page 8. Do you see that at the top of the page? Secondly, please notice this is hypercritical. Alphabetical order. Last name first. Do you see it? Right? Do you see it? So for example, notice here that in this paper on homeschooling, that one of the websites that was used was the Alliance for the Separation of School and State website, right? Notice that did not have an author's name associated with it, but notice it's going to first of all be first because of alphabetical order. Do you see it? Then notice that the next ensuing lines of the citation are indented. Do you see that? Do you see that? So notice A, B, C, C, F, G, H, J. Do you see it? All of those are set out with each ensuing line indented, right? So it's a very clean and easy way for us to read the first line of each citation. Do you notice that each citation then is a space between it, double spaced in between it so that it's easy and clean to read? Do you got me? Any questions about that one? Okay. Then we're going to identify any time that we're working in the body of our paper. In our classic example here, here's Smith. Then we're going to have the Smith entry under the S's. Right? Notice even how I wrote it on the board here. Do you see that? Do you see this indentation? Right? You see that for each one of those, okay? Standard font size is Times New Romans, 10-point font. You shouldn't be working with anything over 12-point font for sure. We're not in middle school anymore or high school where we increase the size of the font to make our papers look longer. No point in it. We double space everything, but we want to make sure that we're not working with font sizes larger than 12-point font. All right? So the idea is real simple. I'm writing a paper on the moon is made of cheese, and I quote Smith. The moon is made of cheese, and I quote Smith. I then, as an instructor or a reader, go to the citation, and I find the name Smith, and then I can see where that information comes from. I have to have enough information here to find that quote, or to find that reference. Okay? So whatever it is that you're giving, you've got to be able to give enough so that you can find it. Now you want to pay attention when you hit the print key, because sometimes software programs will provide the URL information in blue ink, correct? So you want to be careful, because when you hit your print key, you do not want any colored ink on your works cited page. Do you see any colored ink on the works cited pages 778, 779? Only the blue from Axelrod Cooper telling you how it's supposed to look. Now, there's two ways to make this page 778, 779. Two ways to do it. One is to laboriously hand type each one of those entries, making sure about commas, making sure about proper periods and the like. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to let a software help you do it. One of the software programs that allow you to do this is a program called Noodle Tools. That's one word, Noodle Tools. Okay? Now, if you're interested in doing this, and you probably will be because it saves you a prodigious amount of time, Noodle Tools can be a useful software for you. Go to LearnStrong, study Overcast's tutorials on Noodle Tools so that you have a sense about how to do that. You got to set up a password, do some of that kind of stuff, all right? Questions, comments? Suggestion for how to help you when you're writing these papers. When you're in the process of doing the research and the outlining, you're going to begin to do a lot of research to see if you have enough data so that you can find the proper number of citation references. Every time you find the data, suggestion, create a kind of two file system. Okay? In one of those files, create your works cited page as you go. So anything you look at, just put it there. Alright? When you come back later, you can always delete the ones you did not use. It's a whole lot better than doing all the research and then having to go back and find where did I get that quote? That kind of thing. Now, of course, in the old days, we used, index cards, and we wrote all this stuff down on index cards, and then we had to, organize our little cards. All of that, of course, is pretty much an obsolete project these days because of our technology, right? But I still recommend creating one file that is your works cited file, and then another file where you just type up notes. What am I going to say from this one source by Smith? What am I going to say? Okay? Now, the question was asked earlier by Ms. Wright, and it's an important one. What if in the body of my paper, the same Smith quote, to watch my whiteboard here for a sec, the same Smith reference, but I quote or cite two different quotes from the same source? That still only qualifies as a single required source. Okay, so you got to have 5 of these. Right? Smith is the source. You can quote from it as many times as you want, although I'm going to recommend stylistically that you not overquote from a single source. Okay, obviously. You're probably crossing a line after 3 times of using the same source. All right? But even if you're using the source 3 times in the body of the paper, it will only appear on the works cited page 1 time. Now, what if I go and research and I find 2 different articles by Smith, the same Smith? Okay, here I definitely am still providing alphabetical order, last name first. I'm still providing all the information, and I have to make sure that I am providing alphabetical order in terms of the information that follows Smith to decide which one comes first, second, third, etc. Okay? Again, this is so important. You hear what I'm about to say. We are playing a game. Your prof does not sit down to read your paper on photosynthesis or the 3 causes of the American Civil War, or your paper on Hamlet, to learn something new. Not saying profs can't learn new information. Saying that's not why the profs assigned the paper to you. We are playing a game where it's a 3-part dance. The prof gives the prompt question, you do the research. You write the paper where you have your ideas. And that's important. You want to make sure you do have your ideas. Don't just write a paper of totally citation quotes. That, again, starts to cause problems. Dude, I cited everything and said where it came from. Yeah, but how much of the paper is actually your writing? Oh, well, probably only 10% of the paper. You're in trouble. You're in trouble. Profs will jack you seriously for that. The idea is you've got your stuff you're going to say, and you're going to use their stuff, the citation references, to help you say it. So you got me. So in other words, you don't want to invert this process. Even if it's a research paper, you always want to make sure more of your stuff than their stuff. This is important. More of your stuff than their stuff. Okay? But you're going to always make sure that you provide proper attribution. To attribute means you say where it came from. Simple. You're going to provide enough information in the body of the paper along with a works cited page so that if the prof wants to, the prof can go and find that information on his or her own. Okay? Now, again, notice what is not on page 778. Do you see any numbers before any of the entries? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No. Do you see any bullet points? Do you see? No. See, notice you don't see any of that, do you? Right? Okay. Notice if you'll flip back just a couple of pages. Do you see any footnotes at the bottom of the page? No. See, that's a different kind of style book. Do you see any little numbers? Designate? No. See, that's a different kind of style book. The MLA style book, then, very, very simple, very direct. You're going to provide the author's last name. For example, notice on 776, at the end of that first paragraph, Johnson, O'Malley, and Bachman. Do you see it? Do you see what I'm talking about on 776? Right? At the end of that paragraph, Johnson, O'Malley, and Bachman. Now notice there is a period after the parenthetics, but do you notice that there is no quotation marks? Do you see that? Right before the parenthetic and Johnson, notice no quotation marks, which means what kind of citation? Direct or indirect? Secondary or primary? Which one is it? I use new language here when I said direct or indirect, but this is a direct, this is indirect. If it's not got quotation marks, what is it? Clearly the writer summarized the information, but still, there it is. That's where it came from. Johnson, O'Malley, and Bachman. Now, turn the page and find the entry of Johnson, O'Malley, and Bachman. Pretty easy to find, isn't it? Why? Because all I got to do is look for the J, huh? Right? And what do you know? There it is. Now, if I wanted to, I could go find that information. How could I know to find that information? I would go right there to that URL, HTTP address. Notice that HTTP address does not appear in the body of the paper. Right? So go back to page 776. See, notice, there's no URL information there, is there? Right? They provided some information. They summarized it or put it in their own words, which is why there's no quotation mark. It's a secondary quote. It's not a primary quote. Correct? But you still got to tell where it came from. And then there it is listed on the works cited page. So while the prof was reading this paper, if the prof wanted to, don't be shocked by this, because a lot of profs are now asking students to submit their papers online as a digitized type of document. So you email the paper to the prof, which means what? The prof can go to your works cited page and can click, because that's going to be a hot site, isn't it? Can click right on it and go straight to that site. Correct? Which is why it's so vital that you make sure all your information is introduced and attributed correctly. Question?
So the works cited thing, like if you want it to look more like this, do you still want us to number it in our...
You won't be numbering it. There is no numbering that happens in the body of the paper. Now, if there's any kind of stuff done in the margins in red ink, the reason it's done in margins in the red ink, and we sometimes will play that game early on to make sure, did I get all my citations that are listed here in the body of the paper. For example, in the editing phase with this student on 778, I would recommend that Alliance be numbered 1, that Bloomfield be numbered 2, Cohen numbered 3, with red ink, Then we would go into the body of the paper, and